Imagine a king so insane he thought he was made of glass, a ruler who howled through palaces, tore at his own flesh, and trusted no one, not even his own family. Charles VI of France wasn't just a monarch, he was a walking nightmare, trapped in a decaying body and a collapsing mind. His final days weren't dignified, they were grotesque theatre. Welcome to the death spiral of the Mad King, where royal grandeur dissolved into filth, paranoia, and the stench of madness. The shattered glass king. Picture this: the King of France, one of the most powerful men in medieval Europe, convinced he was made of glass. Not metaphorically fragile, literally glass. Charles VI believed that if someone brushed against him too hard, he would splinter into shards and collapse in a glittering heap on the floor. So his servants had to swaddle him like fine china, stuffing iron rods into his clothes to keep his body stable. Imagine walking into court and finding your monarch dressed like a medieval crash test dummy, clanking with every step. It would almost be funny if it wasn't so terrifying, because this wasn't a passing fancy, this was his reality. He refused to be touched. He panicked at the slightest stumble. Courtiers crept around him like waiters carrying crystal goblets, terrified the king's next shriek of horror might send the entire court spiraling into chaos. And as Charles tiptoed through his own delusions, France followed, breaking apart under the weight of a monarch who thought he might shatter. The kingdom itself became glass, fragile, fractured, ready to snap. But the glass was only the beginning. Madness has a way of cutting deeper, and blood was next. Madness on the throne, blood on velvet. That's how one of Charles VI's most infamous breakdowns began. One moment, the king rode with his knights, banners fluttering, a picture of royal pomp. Next, something snapped inside him like a rotten rope. He drew his sword, eyes blazing with paranoia, and butchered his own men. Imagine the shock knights in gleaming armor, cut down not by enemies on the battlefield, but by their own monarch, frothing like a rabid dog. The King of France had turned into the butcher of France. From then on, the throne was no seat of authority. It was a ticking bomb. Courtiers never knew which Charles they'd meet, the quiet, glazed-eyed husk, or the raving monster with steel in his hand. Every council became Russian roulette, with sanity or slaughter spinning on the wheel. Ministers plotted behind curtains, priests whispered exorcisms, and relatives schemed to grab scraps of power while the king licked his wounds and muttered to ghosts. France wasn't ruled by laws or strategy. It was ruled by chance, mood swings, and madness. And if the king could massacre his friends in a heartbeat, what hope did his queen have? The queen who stopped caring. Picture the royal marriage bed, not filled with passion, but with silence, screams, and the occasional padded outfit to stop the king from shattering. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria had once tried to play the dutiful wife. She stood beside Charles during his early breakdowns, even humored his glass delusions. But as the madness deepened, so did her apathy. By the time he was raving in darkened chambers, she had traded marital duty for political maneuvering and a string of lovers who smelled less like rot. Isabeau abandoned her husband in every sense. She left him to stew in his paranoia while she signed treaties that sold chunks of France to the English. She flaunted her affairs, even as Charles gnawed on scraps and shrieked at invisible demons. The Mad King was no longer her partner. He was dead weight, a husk locked away behind bolted doors while she dined with courtiers and bargained with enemies. The irony? France hated her even more than him. The king had lost his mind, but she had lost her reputation. Isabeau became the she-wolf of France, despised as the woman who sold her husband's crown. And Charles, he wasn't even aware enough to notice. But while she turned her back, his body began to rot. And that smell? It couldn't be ignored. A body rotting with the mind. By the end, Charles VI wasn't just mentally shattered. His body had become a grotesque exhibit of decay. Picture a king once draped in silk and jewels, now covered in sores that oozed through his linens, his nails curled into claws, his teeth blackened, his skin mottled with filth. Servants gagged as they entered his chambers, clutching herbs to their noses, praying not to vomit on the floor. The palace stank of rot, but no one dared say it aloud. The king was still sacred, even if he smelled like an open grave. Food rotted in front of him because he refused to eat. Rats darted across his chamber, nibbling at scraps he'd pushed aside, sometimes even scuttling over his bed. Imagine the King of France, cowering under blankets, too weak to swat vermin off his legs. Priests hesitated to approach, as if afraid their blessings would bounce back, sizzling off a man who already seemed half-damned. The line between man and corpse blurred daily. Charles wasn't dying, he was decomposing in slow motion, and everyone had to watch. France's monarch had become its first royal cadaver in residence, and yet, in the final act, the crown itself would mock him more cruelly than disease ever could. The crown of shadows. When the end finally came in 1422, there was no grand farewell, no golden curtain call. Charles VI, the beloved who became the mad, slipped into death babbling nonsense, chewing on rags, and begging demons only he could see for mercy. He didn't know he was king anymore. He barely knew he was human. The once mighty crown of France might as well have been a leaden halo, hanging above a man too broken to lift his head. His attendants whispered prayers, but most whispered relief. After decades of delusion, bloodshed, and decay, the Mad King's death felt less like a tragedy and more like the end of a hostage situation. France was left gutted, fractured by war, betrayal, and the stench of his reign. The throne he left behind wasn't polished oak. It was splintered wood, smeared with shadows. And yet, the legend endured. His madness outlived his body, etched into France's memory like a curse. Because if power corrupts, what does power do when it goes completely insane? The answer: it wears a crown of shadows. Charles VI's final days remind us that power doesn't always decay with dignity, it often rots in public view. His reign wasn't a tale of chivalry or honor, but of delusions, sores, and betrayal. France didn't just lose a king, it endured a nightmare painted in blood and insanity. The Mad King's body may have died, but his shadow lingers in every cautionary tale of rulers who lose their grip. After all, what's scarier than a tyrant? A tyrant who's gone completely insane.